So welcome everyone, despite it being a Monday in the middle of a festive week and in spite of all the Zoom fatigue that we have experienced over the year, I'm delighted to see all of you here and very happy that all of you from various parts of the world have joined us for this meeting. My name is Malshri Joshi. I'm the coordinator of the National Scientific Committee on Industrial Heritage within ICOMOS India. And I welcome you on behalf of my co-coordinator and the group co-coordinator, Mr. Kamal Banerjee, who's here, and the rest of the group to this first session of the lecture series. And the NSC Industrial Heritage is one of the youngest groups within the various NSCs of ICOMOS India. And we are focused on the study and preservation of industrial heritage. This NSC was set up in 2016. And one of the major tasks that we have at hand is to be able to define what we have as industrial heritage, both within India, and our interest lies in the larger in Asia. So without further ado, I welcome you all, and also to say that we are right now in the midst of the meeting in Glasgow, COP26, and that makes it even more special to be speaking about some of the issues that we will today, which industrial heritage by its very peculiar nature is going to touch upon societal, environmental, political, and also of course architectural issues. So just to say that in the middle of all of this is when we are meeting, also in the middle of the pandemic. I hope you're all well. Over to the member of my team, Priyanka Panjidwani, to make introductions. Thank you.
Thank you, Molshri. Good evening and welcome everyone. I'm Priyanka Panjidwani. I'm a conservation architect from Mumbai and a member of the Emerging Professionals Working Group of ICOMOS India, as well as the National Scientific Committee on Industrial Heritage. I am also the coordinator of the National Scientific Committee on Risk Preparedness in ICOMOS India. I strongly believe in the important value of industrial heritage in the culture of a place as well as in climate resilience. Today's lecture, Defining Industrial Heritage in Asia, Subjugation and Development, is supported by ICOMOS India National Scientific Committee on Documentation, National Scientific Committee on 20th Century Heritage, and the Emerging Professionals Working Group of ICOMOS India. Allow me to give you a brief introduction to each. The ICOMOS India National Scientific Committee on Documentation aims to encourage and promote the development of the principles and good practices for recording, documentation, and information management of cultural heritage in line with the SIPA Heritage Documentation Guidelines. The 20th Century National Scientific Committee is interdisciplinary in its membership and recognizes the diversity of regional and cultural expression in 20th century heritage. It focuses its efforts on identifying, documenting, and protecting 20th century heritage as defined in the Indian context. The ICOMOS India Emerging Professionals Working Group was launched in October 2019. The Emerging Professionals Working Group is a multicultural, accessible platform that channels a progressive, uplifting, and enabling environment for emerging professionals or EPs in the field of heritage and culture to foster and facilitate intergenerational engagement and maintains ICOMOS's scientific relevance. So I would also now welcome our first speaker, who is Kai Weise from Kathmandu. And today he will address the topic of industrial heritage in Nepal. What industrialization? Whose heritage? Mr. Kai Weise has been working as a planner and architect in the Himalayan region for the past 3 decades. He has facilitated the establishment of management systems for World Heritage properties in Nepal, Uzbekistan, Myanmar, and India. After the 2015 Gorkha earthquake and the 2016 Chok earthquake, he was responsible for coordinating culture sector response and rehabilitation for the respective governments. Kai Weise, president of ICOMOS Nepal 2013 to 2021, has been regularly lecturing and contributing papers focusing mainly on Asia. Presently, he is the PhD researcher at Durham University, UK. So I hand over the floor to you now, Mr. Kai. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here and talking about industrial heritage in Nepal. As I've written there, what industrialization? There hasn't been too much industrialization in Nepal, which makes it actually more interesting. And then the question is, whose heritage is that which is this industrial heritage that we're trying to define? I've tried to make this as exciting as possible, and I've divided up the presentation into 6 parts. One is in connection with the dilemma of defining industrial heritage, especially in the context of Nepal, but I think it's sort of generally we need to look into, what is included and what not. Early industrial activities in Nepal, industrialization and crypto-colonialism in Nepal, which I'll try to explain what that means. Industrial heritage of need and extravagance, then neo-colonialism, and an inventory of industrial heritage in Nepal. So I'll quickly go through all these 6 sections, and if there are any questions, of course, I'll be glad to answer them. So the dilemma of defining industrial heritage, this we've been discussing also within ECOMOS Nepal in connection with preparing the inventory. And we still haven't come to a clear decision, but I just wanted to raise a few points. One is, of course, industrialization seems to be something that has come from Europe, kind of a thing. It's the smokestacks and all, the industrial revolution and the pollution, and that's sort of the link that we sort of feel that industrialization means this sort of heavy industry, and that's sort of what also was exported throughout the world from Europe, North America, and but that's sort of the one side of industrialization, I guess. On the other hand, in Nepal, that kind of industrialization never got here. What we might call an industry, now the question of scale, what scale are we talking about? At a much smaller scale, we have certain traditional industries. We have a carpet industry, which actually came from Tibet. When the Tibetans came down, we started producing Tibetan carpets, which became one of the main export for the country. We have local paper industries, we have pottery, and then we look at, the small mills, sort of the very local level industries. Now, is this included in what we would consider industrial heritage? Because this sort of leads us down a very different path than what the image that we usually have of industrialization. And very often you might even say this is non-industrial kind of a setup. However, we have one site on the tentative World Heritage List, which is actually called the traditional mustard oil industry in Kokana, which is within the Kathmandu Valley. And it's very local. The mustard is grown on the fields just outside the village. And the village is known for its mustard oil, which is also used traditionally for a lot of different rituals and also for practical purposes. So, how do we look at this industry? And once we were trying to define it in respect to setting up an inventory, it became very complicated. However, well, let me go on with the discussion, and we can maybe come up with, discussing some of these points at the end. So I started trying to explain early industrial activities in Nepal. Now, I've tried to break away from that traditional industry and start looking at what we might be calling an industry more aligned to, if I may say, the Western concept. And it's actually linked to the history of Nepal. Now, here I just wanted to also explain the context. So in the 18th, end of the 18th century, Nepal, the Gorkha kings, they conquered Kathmandu, and then they expanded their country towards the east, first to Sikkim, and then towards the west, all the way to Kumaon, Garhwal, and they even attacked Kangra. And at the same time, we must see that further south, we had the East India Company sort of enlarging themselves and trying to get control of the subcontinent. And if we look at the parallels, it's actually quite interesting because as Nepal was expanding along the Himalayas, along the north, the East India Company was expanding along the Gangetic plains. And somewhere down the line, there was going to be a conflict very clearly. And that was the Anglo-Nepal War in 1816. Now, after the war, there were various battles, mostly won by the British, but a few were won by the Nepalese. But I guess the British decided they were not going to conquer Nepal. However, Nepal did lose a lot of territory, both on the east, which is Darjeeling, and to the west, the whole Kumaon Garhwal area, more or less to the boundaries of today. And so that defined the country, and that started a relationship between the British in India and the Nepali government. In 1846, the prime ministers who were from the Rana family, they took over. So they took over de facto power from the king, and they ruled for 105-6 years. So 1846 to 1951, it was under this Rana family rule. At the same time, we had the 1857 mutiny and the British Raj. So there was sort of a parallel, and the Ranas in Nepal tried to sort of imitate the British and live like the British, and they introduced a lot of development, which we could sort of link to that Western concept of industrialization until 1951. And from 1951, the democratic movement began, which first supported the king, and we had the king in power again until it was the king was kicked out, and in 2008 we became a republic. So I just wanted to bring that whole context of the history, which is really the backdrop of all the little stories that I'm going to be telling in the following slides. So initially, with the expansion along the Himalayas, so this is about 1,000. I sort of measured sort of over 1,300 kilometers along the Himalayas. And this expansion, of course, required arms and ammunition. And that became a logistical problem. And so more or less one of the first industries that we could actually call an industry was the production of arms and ammunition, and especially ammunition, because as they expanded, they did build this sort of Hulaki Marg, which is like a postal road to make sure that the communication functioned. But it was such a long distance, and it's usually up and down the valleys along the Himalayas, that they started producing locally these the ammunition which was required. So they set up a whole system of these small industries to be able to provide the ammunition required for this expansion, which then continued on into the late 19th century, where they started producing more heavy arms. But this was, of course, on a much smaller scale. I mean, this was produced in Kathmandu. And so we could say that in this initial phase of history where they required the arms and ammunition, they established the production on an industrial scale, one could say. And this is, of course, sort of the beginning of this conflict and relationship with the British in India. Now to talk about this relationship between Nepal and India. And this crypto-colonialism is a word introduced by Michael Hertzberg. He was, I think, at Harvard. And I met him once, and he sort of explained he was very excited about Nepal because it wasn't colonialized. It wasn't a colony, but it was, of course, very dependent on the British in India. And this relationship is actually quite interesting, and which, according to his explanation, this could be a crypto-colonialism of Nepal. Now, in this context, I'll just be explaining certain developments, which again links to the industrialization of the country. Because Nepal, of course, was not colonized, we never had a train like in Darjeeling. So after Darjeeling was taken away from Nepal, you had certain developments that took place there directly under the British. However, we did have a ropeway that was built quite early, 1922, which one actually, again, with a lot of support from the British. Most of the equipment came from England, probably, or some was produced in India, but a lot of this was actually brought in from Britain. And just another comment on this ropeway, how actually these ropeways were really efficient for the hilly terrain. Even though we didn't have any roads into Kathmandu in 1922, we had the 1934 huge Bihar-Nepal earthquake. And this ropeway continued functioning and was able to bring in supplies to the Kathmandu Valley. So just as a further comment, how this introduction of the ropeway was actually probably easier and more beneficial than having a railway put into the Kathmandu. It is now, of course, not functioning because of the road and road transportation and a lot of politics. However, even though we don't have a railway, the whole Terai, the forests in the south were cut for wood to build the railways. The wood was sold to the British for the sleepers of the railway track. So most of our forests in the south were cut and removed for the railways that we never got. And it was it was sold by especially the Rana prime ministers for relatively cheap. If we look at it now, it's, they could have probably gotten a better deal. But again, this is that indirect impact of industrial development that took place, outside the border, but impacted the country and the environment. The first proper factory building, very European, and like a proper industrial facility was the Biratnagar jute mills that was built in 1936. We had the 1934 earthquake. This was sort of part of the post-earthquake rehabilitation, again, largely supported by the British and the interest of the Raj to access the jute production within Nepal, because of course the borders were closed. Nepal was very isolated. They wouldn't allow anything. They built and they helped build this Biratnagar jute mills in 1936. Beautiful facilities, really, wonderful buildings with, it looks like a proper factory. Probably it's one of the few that we have in Nepal. And there was interesting that the main diesel engine that ran the factory was actually from Switzerland, from actually the city from where my father comes from. So it was actually interesting that it was a ship's engine that they had sort of somehow brought in all the way to Biratnagar to set up this factory. What was very interesting about this is the Biratnagar jute mills, and there was the Biratnagar sugar mills nearby. This was the only industry or larger sort of industry where you had workers, several thousand workers coming together in Nepal. And interestingly, that this became sort of where the democratic movement in Nepal really took root. We hear about, sort of the social reforms and political activities that had taken place in Europe due to the lack of facilities for the workers, and they demonstrated. But it's interesting to understand that in Nepal, the only area, these two factories, and the Biratnagar jute mill was the main factory, where the politicians began to learn their trade of bringing people together and having these speeches. And there is the tree where BP Koirala, who became our first elected prime minister later on, he had his speeches from there to the workers. And very interesting that this was the only place he could have probably done it in Nepal. And it was built, this factory, which was again very closely linked to the interests across the border of the British at the time. And on the right, we see the last Rana prime minister, King Tribhuwan, who again took over power from the Rana prime ministers in 51, and BP Koirala at that time, who then in the first democratic elections in 1959, he won the elections. So that was our first prime minister. So again, the link between industrial development and sort of democratic movement of the country, that's, maybe this needs to be looked into more, but probably this is really a place where, a lot of people come together, they might not be satisfied, and we further discuss, they become politicized. In 1995, I had the opportunity to actually work on this when the Communist Party won the elections, and we were trying to revive the factory and get it functioning. Sadly, later on, the following government leased it out to private parties. But if I just drew that red line on that plan, and that's the border to India. So the factory actually is built right on the border, and the trains would come in, load up on the jute, the gunny, and drive out again. So very clearly, this factory was built not for the market in Nepal, but clearly to tap the resources of Nepal and take it out back into India. Now, in connection with the further sort of industrial heritage, I actually wrote an article of need and extravagance, and this was some time back. And it's been really interesting to try to understand during the Rana period, they had all these new developments that they carried out. And was it really needed, or was it just more extravagance in connection with they wanted to be like the British, and so they wanted that some kind of development to show off. And firstly, of course, the extravagance. They built huge palaces, they imported chandeliers and a lot of the interiors, and they wanted to live their opulent life, very often following the example of the British or other colonial powers in Europe. I mean, sometimes it was they'd gone to Paris and wanted a bit of the French imperial designs and things. And so you had sort of that side, which is a very personal interest of, bringing in these products from abroad. On the other hand, you also had cars being carried into the Kathmandu Valley. So you didn't have the road, but you'd have, they built roads around the Kathmandu Valley so that they could drive around. And so you had the extravagance. But then we had, early on, the hydropower station built. And this was just 500 kilowatts. So they built this really to power the few lights in the various Rana palaces, their own palaces. And there was a few street lights, and so the question is, of course, who needed it? They wanted to light up, have electrical lighting within their palaces. But then I guess it also initiated a development which then, took root and continued later on for everyone. But very clearly at the initial stages, it was only selected people who could, link up to these developments. Another very interesting sort of import, again, these were never produced in Nepal, but imported, were the suspension bridges. And I believe all of these suspension bridges were actually manufactured in Scotland. And it was actually very interesting because in one of our conferences, I met someone from Scotland who was very much involved in industrial heritage. And he wrote back and said, oh yeah, he's got information on these bridges. And he sent me some information from some of the factories at that time that exported these bridges, especially to Asia. And it was very interesting to see that there was a whole list of these bridges that were sent to Nepal. And so we have the suspension bridges as well as these road and light railway bridges. For example, the one on the right, they set it up in Scotland before it was dispatched in 1928 from Glasgow to Kathmandu. Now, this was for a railway that was built in the south, a very short stretch. I'll come back to that. But again, all this was actually brought in. All these bridges were from Scotland, a lot from Glasgow, and various other cities. Most of them there's some kind of signage on them, which makes it very interesting also to document, of course. Even though, again, the question is, whose heritage is it? I guess we keep having to ask that question. For example, another very interesting development during the Rana period was these fire hydrants. So they put in fire hydrants, and interestingly, the traditional buildings, they were never really prone to fires. With the brickwork, usually the brickwork divided up we had they would function like firewalls. If there was a fire, it would be a single building. It was all under control. So it was more the new palaces that were a threat of catching fire. And but the question was really, was it really required to have these fire hydrants go through the city, or was it really something that they wanted to show that they're developing the city? For example, this is from Glasgow 1890, which is actually quite early. So we have these kind of hydrants all over the place. Some are still functioning, but are used as taps. A lot of them are not connected anymore. We can still find them sort of scattered throughout Kathmandu city as well. At the same time, after the 1934 earthquake, we had the Ranas put in sort of this urban insert of what was called, well, we call it the new road, but the Jute Sadak, where they lined the street on both sides with new buildings, stucco facade. And one of the things they also introduced was the fire brigade. So right at the corner, very prominent location was the fire brigade that they set up with the fire engines and all like a proper fire brigade. And if you look at this old photograph, of these proud firemen, the same fire engine we still have in storage there. And we wanted to actually, restore it in the sense of for the museum. They have kept all the fire brigades that they've had throughout, since 1935-6, and it makes up a really wonderful exhibition, which still has not been set up. Now, I've again written a lot about this. They wanted, it was not even slightly damaged, but they more or less had an assessment done and said that this fire, it's not a very impressive building, but it's they wanted to tear it down, and on the left side you see the design. They wanted to rebuild that building. Luckily, in 2006, when we redefined the boundaries, we kept this building inside the World Heritage, and we're still trying to save it from being demolished and rebuilt. And hopefully that can be used as a museum of the all the equipment and the engine that we still have. Last small addition, I wasn't sure whether I should get into this, but I thought as a for the sake of continuity, it's important to show what went on later. In 1967, the Himal cement factory was set up within the Kathmandu Valley, funded by the German government. We aren't quite sure, I haven't really researched it, but we kept hearing that it was an old factory from Germany that that they didn't need, and we got it. It was the beginning of big time pollution within the Kathmandu Valley. And somewhere down the line, the locals, really just wanted to get rid of it. And now they've actually demolished it recently. But that whole industrialization, it's sort of this, a cement factory. Yes, Nepal needed a cement factory, but the type of pollution that it created within the Kathmandu Valley, that really was an issue. And everyone was talking about it, throughout the 70s, 80s, blaming this cement factory that we were given by the Germans. The most recent discussions are, of course, the railway again. We come all the way around. We had a railway built in 1927, sort of this real short section in Janakpur, that's south near the Indian border. That section has been, I think, widened to broad gauge very recently with the help of the government of India. And we even got 2 modern railways in Nepal now on that section. On the other hand, we have the proposed Belt and Road Initiative that the Chinese want to build the railways down across the Himalayas into Kathmandu, Pokhara, down to Lumbini, which is a big issue for the government of India. But again, it's sort of this railway diplomacy going on, which is, again, big time infrastructure development linked to this neo-colonialism is what I called it. But again, it's big time politics at the moment. Last, very short, we have ICOMOS Nepal has worked on an inventory of 19th, 20th century architectural industrial heritage. Volume 1 was on the architecture. And we have prepared it. It's still just volume 1. We still have a lot of work to do. We have not started on the industrial, well, let's say we've started, but we've not really been able to compile the industrial heritage component, which hopefully will be volume 2. What I just wanted to say is, again, in connection with definitions, this is the latest categories that we've come up with. One is industrial production, sort of the early factories and the production. Second category would be transportation as well as related facilities to transportation, railways, ropeways, things like that. Then production and distribution of services, electricity and water, as I've presented. And then the 4th category was this industrially produced products, which are, most of this was brought into Nepal, but the individual products which wouldn't fall into the first 3 categories. So this we're really planning on moving ahead with this inventory, and hopefully we'll have something done in the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Mr. Weise, for giving us an overview of the history and development of the industrial heritage in Nepal, and also sharing with us the inventory and the definitions. It was really enlightening. Thank you. Molshi, you've raised your hand.
No, that was just claps for Kai, not raising my hand. Over to you, Priyanka, to introduce the second speaker.
Right.
And then we'll take questions and answers at the end of the session. So please write into the chat box.
Thank you. Thank you, Molshi. Our next speaker is Hasti Terakat from Amsterdam. And today she will be speaking on the topic Industrial Heritage in Indonesia, Balancing Content and Packaging. Hasti Terakat is an independent cultural heritage professional based in Amsterdam who concentrates on capacity development of cultural heritage field in Indonesia and other Asian countries. One of her researches is industrial heritage, especially formulating appropriate conservation approaches for Asian countries. Hasti Terakat is the co-chair of ANI, which is the Asia Network for Industrial Heritage. Over to you, Hasti.
Thank you very much, Priyanka, and thank you very much to all participants who join. I also I'm happy to see some friends and colleagues from from Indonesia, from the Netherlands, but all of you, the participants. I'm humbled to share with you a little bit of my experience in industrial heritage. So I will share my screen now. Yeah. Could you see it now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Oh, I have to start from the beginning. Yeah. Okay, this is the beginning. Okay. By the way, I'm also a member of ICOMOS Netherlands, and before I even member of ICOMOS Indonesia also. So I paid double every year, but now I pay only once. It's nice to see all the ICOMOS members and friends all over the world here. I'm basically a practitioner, but to be able to do a good practice, you have to research. So I have no choice. So I also become a researcher. So I would like to share with you more my experience about from the field, but also from the researching point of view. I'm choosing, that's why I'm also choosing the title, which also consists of the two, balancing content and packaging. So when I started working in cultural heritage in the early 90s, actually, I didn't choose industrial heritage because in Indonesia at the time that heritage was not classified. So I was involved a lot in all kind of heritage, including built heritage. But then I noticed when I entered the industrial heritage topics in Indonesia, that most of the built heritage related to industry are owned by the government. And to be able to raise awareness about the importance of industrial heritage, of course, I have to start with the owners, and the owners are the governments. This is the 13 industrial sectors in Indonesia who own tremendously industrial built heritage assets in Indonesia. So you can see all kind of industry here, and there are more than 150 companies. You name it, from agriculture's water management system traditionally until scientific, the IT's company, telecommunications, and in between you can find railway and everything, water supply. So it is very strategic, and I don't think that we can avoid not to work with the owners of the industrial heritage assets if we would like to see something happen, because that's also my point of view. When I do something, I want to see something happen in the field also, not only raising awareness. And talking, I will not start it from what the definitions of industrial heritage, because all of us are here professionals. So I think I assume that we are on the same page about what the meanings of industrial heritage. So I jump into some essential projects in Indonesia, which happened in the last 10 years, about related to industrial heritage assets. First of all, there are a lot of happenings in plantations industry. Some of the big ones are in Central Java, with the renovations of the former sugar factory Colomadu, and in Medan, North Sumatra, with the establishment of the Indonesian Plantations Museums. And both projects are public-private partnerships. It means that the state-owned company in plantations, they finance the projects, but the experts and the knowledge are come from community and professionals field. And the second, what happened also is in the mining industry in West Sumatra, in Sawah Lunto, a former coal mining. So it's a whole town that used to produce coal. And the second, also in the mining industry, is a former tin mining in Muntok in South Sumatra. And the Sawah Lunto has received World Heritage status in 2019. So now it's 2 years. So it is a good sign. It's an encouragement as an example for other mining industry, but also the stakeholders in industrial heritage assets owners about preservations of industrial heritage. And what has been longer happened is actually about railways industrial heritage. So the establishment of Ambarawa Museum Central Java, so including reactivations of some historical railways routes. So I think, and in the last few years, there are few industrial heritage initiatives also appeared, especially in Java. But these are the pioneers, are the biggest so far. So I will just show you some of the image, so you have the idea about those projects. And sugar industry is one of my focus of research also, because in the last 5 years, I've been trying to revive the sugar heritage trail, especially in the East Java, the main producers of sugar during the colonial times. This is the factory of Colomadu sugar factory in Central Java. And this is the result of my research, that I could trace back the sugar industries in Indonesia even before the colonial times, so pre-colonial periods, back to the 12th century. But I will show you this kind of time periods to show you that most of research and conservation related to industrial heritage focus more on the colonial periods, while actually the pre-colonial periods is also significant. But it seems that from scientific point of view, that most of study now focus on the colonial periods. And this is about the sugar industry. I will not read the details, just to show you about the periods from the 12th century until the 20th century. And you can get the details about all of this from the organizers, because I have shared the PDF presentations with the organizers. And this is about the simultaneously 2 museums established about plantations industry in the same city, Medan. So it shows that how important the plantation industry before in this city. So most of European planters, plantations investors came to this city in the 19th century and become booming. So they have a lot of built heritage related to the plantation industry, especially the tobaccos and rubber. Yeah. So this a serious, huge built heritage. And this also showing the time periods about how the tobacco industry in the east coast of Sumatra. So from 1860s. And the preservations only last 2 years ago. Yeah. So all of these projects are new. And just to show you about the plantation industry in the past, about tobacco, for example. Yeah. And now we go to the mining, former coal mining in Sawah Lunto. This is some impressions. And the state-owned company in the coal mining together with the local government, has renovated a lot of built heritage, including also reviving the railway stations and the railway routes, because the mining industry couldn't be established without the port and also the railways. So it's become a triangle points. It's not only the mining but also the transportations. This just to give you some examples about the time periods that it started in 1892, and I have to okay. So it's only in 2003 that they realized that the town has to find a new meaning after the mining was not produced anymore. And this is to give you examples about the railways heritage of Sawah Lunto. It is impressive and a huge project, only in one site. This is to give you examples that the railway heritage of Sawah Lunto is about 220 kilometers. Yeah, and it is some impressions from the past. Yeah. And about the railways industrial heritage, actually the Dutch has started the railway networks in Java in the mid 19th century. So it was quite impressive, because in 1930 the total railroad in Java already achieved 7,400 kilometers. And this is the maps give you examples about the networks. Yeah. And this is about the former headquarters of the tin mining company in Muntok, South Sumatra. We have been done some research about these sites. Also now it's still going on, including related to the new concepts of the UNESCO about how we revive this city based on the approach of historic urban landscape. So my colleagues from Indonesia and Netherlands, we work together to help the local stakeholders to take historic urban landscapes approach. And we are going to publish soon a book about these sites related to historic urban landscape. So I think all of you will hear about this sometime before end of this year. And this give you some impressions about the city of Muntok. And again, mining always related to transportations, either by sea or by railway. In this case, is the sea in the Muntok. And it's a very amazing to learn about how industry actually create a multicultural society. As you see that from the built heritage, you also see a vernacular architecture of Chinese, of Malay, of locals, not only the colonial architectures. And railways of Ambarawa, yeah, this is about the museums of Ambarawa in East Java, in Central Java, yeah, which is only 11 years ago was stated as a monument. Yeah, this is some impressions about railways of Ambarawa. That's quite impressive about the networks. Yeah, but also some built heritage, other stations or fort here. Yeah, this is what the current situations is. Yeah, and why I address the issues about balancing content and packaging. In my experience as researchers and also as practitioners, is it is very important to find a balance about interpretations, storylines, and narratives, especially when industrial heritage movement like in Indonesia is relatively new. We are looking for what kind of interpretation, storyline, and narratives we are going to choose. Either we come back, we come back to the pre-colonial periods, or focus only at a certain times in the colonials. What happened in reality in the field is that now what happened with this industrial heritage project that I have shared with you is most focus in times of peace and progress, and focusing on technology and architecture. While we have to remember that industry happened in times of war and occupations. So there are a lot of narratives that are invisible, concealed, forgotten, repressed, or erased. Somehow we still have to work on this. I don't know about experience in other Asian countries, but probably we can discuss it. This is what I think still missing. Although there are some voices now, but they are not strong yet. Second is about balance in periods and geographical representations. So between historical facts from the past with rise and falls of the industry at the present days. So it is also very important, especially when we want to raise awareness about industrial heritage, that we show not only the glorious days of the past, but also create a proximity. What the importance, what relations of industrial heritage with myself, with my current lives, with the present days? What because if the owners, the community, the government, the stakeholders didn't see any benefits of the present days, then the raising awareness efforts are very difficult. And second is to also find balance between local, national, regional, and international contexts. What happened so far are most of the projects focus on the local geographical representations, while any industry usually happen related to national, regional, and even international contexts. I think in the case of Indonesia, Indonesia couldn't deny relations with the Netherlands as the starters of the industry, modern industry in the colonial periods of Indonesia. I will show you, for examples like this book. It is the history of the infrastructures of Indonesia in the last 200 years, between 1800 to 2000. So it shows that, and the Dutch was in Indonesia 350 years, and this book only tell about 200 years. That's how important looking at the context of international. And the next is the balance between values and valorization. So how passing the heritage spirits and accommodating the fun elements. I'm a bit worried about the tourism approach of industrial heritage, because I saw some small initiatives like the relatively small former sugar factory was opened as a restaurant and a special place to take pictures, Instagrams. So anything was created to accommodate the pictures that suits for Instagrams, which is nothing wrong with that. But I think, yeah, if it's only for Instagrams, then losing the value as an industrial heritage sites, then I think there is something wrong with it. So tourism is not wrong, but tourism is not everything. And second, also related to that, is a balance between short-term programs and long-term programs. And scientifically, there are still a lack of documentations in Indonesia about industrial heritage. And we've been trying to do that. I've been trying also to encourage my colleagues in Indonesia, and it's starting slowly, yeah, because it is very important. Well, I think that's what I could share with you. I hope that this triggers to more discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Ms. Hasti, for sharing with us the fascinating industrial heritage projects in Indonesia and the plantation industry, the mining industry, and the railways, and showing us how industry creates multicultural stories. Over to you now, Molshi, for moderating the session.
Thank you, Priyanka, and absolutely wonderful sessions with the two speakers. Thank you so much for both the talks. I'd like to open the floor for questions if there are any. We've already received two in the chat box, so if the authors of these questions could just turn on their mics, please. I see that there is a question from Mario. It's a remark for Hasti. And then there's a question from Nita Dubey. If you're here, could you take these on? No. So Mario says in Lahat, South Sumatra, the Dutch also built railways in 1924, built tunnel in 1928 to 29, and it is still in use now. This tunnel is 10 longest tunnels in Indonesia. The Dutch also built a place to repair all trains to South Sumatra.
Thank you, Mario, for these informations, and for all of us. This is another proof that how rich industrial heritage in Indonesia is. There are many things that we can do. So thank you, Mario, for these tips. I'm going to note it. And not only I'm going to note it, I think all of us, we have to do something about it, especially you. You are probably local from South Sumatra. Probably you also can take initiatives with your government. With all industrial heritage professional, we can support you. Would you like to say something, Mario, about this?
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. So glad to meet you all. I'm in Lahat, South Sumatra. I just let you know that in Lahat, South Sumatra, in 1924, Dutch built a railway, and in 1929 has built a tunnel. The tunnel right now still using for transportation Palembang, Lahat to Lubuk Linggau. This tunnel is the longest, 10 longest tunnel in Indonesia. And also that's built workshop for repair all train in South Sumatra and Lampung area. So this workshop is called Balayasa. Says could be the biggest workshop for train in South Sumatra, and the complete workshop for train in Indonesia, because they repair many kind of train, yeah. And right now, especially the train is for coal. The coal is bring from Tanjung Inim to Lampung, and every single day the coal from Tanjung Inim to Lampung, I don't know how many tons, but the train is one the longest train in Indonesia. Yeah. That's all that I can say to all of you. Thank you very much, and good evening.
Thank you very much, Mario. There's just another question from Neeta. If Neeta is here, you could take it on yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks to both the speakers for bringing up this new arena, of industrial heritage. There's a lot in India, as you all may be knowing. So my question is actually, and I might have a photograph also, but I have to look into my repository. So my question actually is that there are a lot of, in many states, at many railway stations, I have seen these. One is in Nainital, of course, that is not a railway station, but in a in premises of a hotel. There are a lot of small, earlier engines, train engines placed. So I was just wondering that if, while we are talking about the railway heritage, are these being also considered as connecting links between the two countries? The one which I have mentioned, especially in the in my question, is at Banbasa, which is a border place in India. So, are these being considered, especially for documentation and I mean creating a chronology, that way?
Kai, this is a question for you.
Thank you for that comment. I have no idea of the railway on that corner of Nepal. And I know that there was another railway, a narrow gauge coming up from the south, Hitoda, to the sort of the railway head just south of Kathmandu, from where actually the ropeway started. That narrow gauge railway, again, it's not functioning, and I'm not even sure how much of it remains. That's the second railway line that I came across, and I know of no other railway within Nepal. Now, it would be, of course, interesting to see whether there were little, bits and pieces where the connections went across the border, such as at the Biratnagar jute mills, where actually the railway did come into the factory, where they'd load up the thing and just go across again. So it's, of course, interesting to see the linkages across the border, because of course, the transportation was always linked to products, possibly from Nepal, whatever might have been produced there, being exported and taken out across the border. So I don't know of that that there would have been any railway line, along the far western border. But just in connection with the railways, I have worked on the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway. And when I was working on one of the reports, I was trying to find all the steam engines that were ever part of the DHR. And, some were sent to the Raipur Railway, some to Assam. Then you have several sort of standing on blocks in front of railway museums, or even some government. I know in Dehradun there's one. Then, of course, Railway Museum. And so I was sort of looking for where all of these steam engines went, and Indian Railways did put together like an inventory of all where they are. So it's so yeah, that's a bit of a different story, but again, I think it's very exciting, and I think railways, there's something poetic about railways, I think, and running after all the bits and pieces, it's really exciting. But from the Nepal side, again, the closest I've gotten to railway heritage were those bridges, and I think a lot of the other things have already been removed. And now with the railway to Janakpur being made into broad gauge, I think possibly there isn't very much left of that railway.
Yeah. So just one little piece of information again to add to that one, because what I got to learn from the locals, while documenting, we need to also get in touch with the community, what ideas they had and all that. So out of curiosity, when I asked, they said India had it was during the British period that the railway line was being laid down, but India got independence, and that's how it was left like that. And that's how that engine lies over there as it is. So that was the story from locals.
So that's on the Indian side.
Yes.
So that Mulshi will have to deal with that.
Yeah, I think this is like an urban legend. Yeah.
Thank you.
There are several. Thank you, Neeta.
Thank you.
if there are any more questions, there is one from Jan. Jan, could you take this up?
Yes, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for two excellent presentations. And I'm very happy about this because I think you both in different ways bring up the importance of globalization in the case of industrial heritage. And I think I would like to point to one small thing. And in Sweden, there has been a very vivid discussion on the concept of proto-industrialization. That is a development which came before and parallel to the industrialization in the late 19th century. In Sweden and in Europe, there is a very direct lineage and development from proto-industrialization to industrialization. This is not there mostly in countries like Nepal, India, or Indonesia. There is a very important gap or break in development, and the industry, the big scale industry, is brought in from the colonial powers. But my point is really, and I wonder if you have any comments to this, because I believe that the small scale industry, like Kai brought up of tapestry, paper, and pottery, is still extremely important to bring up in your contexts, even if there is no direct connection to the big European industries, because this also brings up a very important part of the development and history, which was not allowed to develop because of colonialism and neo-colonialism. This is my real point, and I wonder if you have any opinion on this.
I can respond if I may. Yeah, Mostly.
Please.
Yes, thank you, Jan, for raising the questions, which is very good, and thank you also for reminding me of this. In Indonesia, actually, there are many initiatives about the small-scale industry. One of the good examples is about traditional textile industry like batik, which was so good that UNESCO has admitted as batik is a World Heritage intangible of Indonesia. So, and then after this status, batik revived again. Batik was very threatened by modern productions of the new modern textiles. But since the status as a World Heritage it was like a pandemic. From presidents to school children, all wear batiks. Even there was an obligations for the government officers for certain days to wear batiks, also for school children. So it's good to revive, but then again, it's a problem because the intentions of claiming traditional textiles as a heritage is the skills and the knowledge about it. But somehow that the mass modern productions by machine took a benefit of these situations. So then there was a conflict between the original way of producing a batik and mass productions with yeah. And also there are a lot of other examples of small scale industry is I'm involved in research about water management, but then from the cultural and historical points of view. And that was happened actually and done in a lot in villages in the agricultural area, done by the natives locals. So I've been researching about what is the local wisdoms and the local knowledge about water management related mostly to agriculture. So that's also a kind of examples of industrial heritage research, which has which connects more to the natives and the locals, not to the colonial periods, and which is fascinating. And maybe in the next webinar about industrial heritage, I also should put this kind small scale and local and natives initiatives examples, not only the big scales. That's my comments.
Should I also say
Please,
something?
Kai,
First of
over
all,
to
I'd like
you.
to say it's wonderful to see you, Jan, after quite some time. Yes, I think this is exactly what I've been sort of struggling with. You know, we said, oh, we'll prepare an inventory, and then the question was, okay, you know, where do we start and what do we include and where do we go, and also, you know, categorizing and what is the value, and you know, you get into these things because we're trying to put them into little boxes and say, okay, this is the category of this, and this fits in here, and it doesn't quite fit in and all. So it's been an interesting discussion, and I'd like to actually continue the discussion beyond today. I hopefully we can continue this. The interesting thing, just you know, as something more practical that I experienced after the earthquake, was in respect to the response, especially of reconstruction, let's say of traditional buildings, but mainly of monuments, where we started looking at the building industry and the production of building materials, and where do we draw the line in connection with what is acceptable and what not, and traditional knowledge versus, you know, sort of the industrial production of, let's say the foreign alien materials which we introduce to make a building stronger and more stable. But that wasn't what the buildings were doing in the past. They were flexible, and you know, it was a whole different approach to addressing even the earthquake forces. And it's like two different totally different systems, and wherever you bring them together, you know, usually the modern material is stronger and harder and less flexible, and the traditional you know, is damaged, or you say is weaker, which isn't really the case. And I think this again leads to this whole differentiation between production and use of traditional versus, let's say, I don't know whether that's the right, industrially produced you know, materials also in construction. And that's been sort of a major discussion that's been going on. But again, wherever we come, it's always that same points that we are trying to understand and deal with.
Yeah, yeah. And my own interest coming from, I mean, after doing a documentation of several sites in India, has been really to shift the focus, as you know, Jan, that you mentioned, from the industrialization led by the colonial rule to the systematic deindustrialization. And I think it's no longer an alternative view to look at how systematically, how strategically, how fast, and also how sort of relentless was the deindustrialization process under colonial rule. And that's something that we don't study very much because we like to divide things into silos. And but industrialization then becomes across networks and landscapes, because it's a kind of a study of how power is shifting the balance constantly between geographies and between time and space. And this has been very evident in India if you look at the various traditional industries and how their patronage rapidly declined with the rising industrialization of Britain. And while this is not enough time to discuss this in detail, but this view will be a very productive view, I think, to study Asian industrialization in some ways also, because it fueled a lot of what was happening outside. A lot of the resource management here was powering industrialization in other countries. And we never see it as a kind of a twin process. So yeah, very interesting. And I think something left to be done here. Kai, yes?
I just wanted to make a small comment. I was in India last week, and I'm not going to get into the details, but we were also discussing, for example, the politics, linking it to politics. And it was interesting because in Nepal, again, the whole industrial development, linking it to that only little small place where you had the politicians in front of the laborers, you know, with their speeches and the whole democratic movement. But also, if you look at Gandhi and Khadi, it wasn't really sustainable. You know, I mean, the material produced through modern methods were so much cheaper and so much easier, you know, to produce that, you know, where are the linkages? And it's just interesting that it became a symbol of going back to the traditional. And the question is, where does it make sense and where it doesn't? Where did it work and where it didn't work? But I think that's, again, part of the narrative of industrialization, linking it to, you know, social improvement, improvements in other areas, as well as the link to the politics, of course. On the one hand, colonialization, but then also the modern, you know, the democratic movement and how we are trying to develop our countries today. I think that those narratives become very important.
Yeah, so not just sites of productions of commodity, but also ideas. That's what we are going back to, both with India and Nepal. Hasti?
I think now we have a platform in Asia to let the voice of Asia more to the world, and especially in the industrial heritage platforms and documentations about what industrial heritage in Asia is. And a platform like Asian Network for Industrial Heritage, ANI, for example, or probably in e-commerce or Tiki, we could voice more about what actually the real industrial heritage in Asia outside the colonial periods. I think we have the platforms, but so all the researchers, I also talk to my Indonesian colleagues now, probably we should more publish in English, because that's the language that international community understand, unfortunately. That's because the more and more publications about this, then the paradigm about industrial heritage will shift naturally. I think that's what we should do. Because why we focus more on the colonial periods? Because the former colonial countries are in positions, luxury positions, to publish a lot of documents. It's unbelievable. As an Indonesian living in the Netherlands, it's overwhelming how much information you can get from the Dutch sides, but almost nothing from the Indonesian side. So, by the way, talking about the natives, I would like to ask, if I may, by a moderator, one of my colleagues from Indonesia, Cindy Indira, who involved in conservations of the plantation industry in North Sumatra. Probably Cindy, as what the good things is, Cindy also part of the young professionals, young and emerging professionals. That's the term, right? Yeah, I'm an old and dying professionals.
Before we move to Cindy, may I invite Onmar Myo? She's joined us from Myanmar and she has raised her hand for a question.
Okay,
so
Cindy, please go ahead, share your experience, Cindy.
Yes, thank you, Bu Hasti, and thank you, Mausri. How are you? Well, I'm on my way home, but I pull over, so it's fine. Well, Sumatra Heritage Trust since the pandemic, actually, we are busy assisting and also working together with the Indonesian Museum of Plantations in Medan, North Sumatra, to conserve and also to restore. And also in the same time, we make a plan of adaptive reuse of the museum. And then it is with the biggest support from the plantations company, even the government private owned company. And then we think that this is one of the spirits. I think the spirit is not only from us, the grassroots, but also now there are already attentions from the government in a way in their business. They see that this is one of the potentials to make use of their assets to reach out more people, to reach out even young people, because we are planning to make a co-working space and also a cafe that will be able to attract young people to know about museums and to learn about plantations and how now going on within the plantations in Medan, Indonesia. So we thought that this is already like a progress, we think, and then we hope that it will go smoothly within the conservations. And then we want to get broader engagement from the community. I think
Thank you.
maybe it helps.
Thank you. Cindy, could you post some of the links to this work on the chat box so more people can look into this? Thank you for joining us. I'd like to invite Onmar Myo, our colleague from Myanmar, who has joined us, and she wants to ask something.
Thank you, Joshi, and good afternoon to everyone. So maybe my question is like from the very beginning of how we can define the industrial heritage. So it is what are the criteria to define the core criteria? So do we have to develop like that? For example, like in Myanmar, my question might be also goes to Kai, because Kai knows well about the Myanmar industrial heritage. And for example, like we have the railway tracks, all are like a middle gauge. 95% of the railways in our country are still middle gauge. And then how can we sustain all these middle gauge railway tracks, for example? But it is not possible to maintain everything. Maybe someday in the near future, these railway tracks will be developed as the modern railway tracks. So what are the adjustments and how can we work on it? Yes, thank you.
Kai, would you like to respond to this?
Good evening. Yeah, I would not want to say I'm an expert on this, and so I'll give you my opinion, but you might have to find the proper experts who know how to answer this question. I mean, from my point of view, more on a general concept of cultural heritage. I think, yeah, all the railways in Myanmar, I think there's certain sections which are really impressive, and probably the ones with the ones I have not visited with the wonderful bridges and and I think, so one always has to sort of define which are the parts where which you might be able to protect as heritage, which then you'd probably want to keep as meter gauge. While yes, the main lines, you'll probably be changing to broad gauge whenever you decide to have proper functioning railways in Myanmar. But yeah, I mean, anything new is today meter gauge. I mean, a broad gauge, not meter gauge. For example, even with the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway, we had the Siliguri station where we had 3 different gauge in one station. So you had the narrow gauge of the DHR, you had a meter gauge, which was a shorter line, and then you had the broad gauge, which actually went out to Assam. But the meter gauge they got rid of, so now it's just a 2 gauge railway station. Before it was a 3 gauge railway station. So it's a sort of a pity, but again, any major new railways, they're going to be broad gauge. But to keep it a heritage, I think, you know, there are certain segments which you'd probably want to keep the way they are.
Okay, thank you. And I also like to invite all the experts who are interested in developing the industrial heritage in our country, because actually, as you know, we were the colonial side of from the 19th century to the late 20th century. So we have a lot of industrial heritage, but nobody awares about what the industrial heritage is in Myanmar. So if you are interested in developing or sustain of this industrial heritage in Myanmar, you all are welcome. Thank you.
I would like to say to Omar, Mio, I could connect you with the Railway Conservation Society of Indonesia, because we are also in the early stage of conservation. So that's probably there are a lot that we can learn from each other. Yeah.
Yes. Please do.
So advanced like in Europe, so it's too far. But Indonesia with a lot of falls and rise efforts, probably. Yeah.
Thank you, Hasti. Yeah, we'll be in touch.
There is a last comment that we can take from Jan.
Yes, I'm returning a bit to the issue of the small-scale pre-industrial heritage, because one of my strong memories from the MAN workshop in Padang on the great cement factory was the knowledge of the Indonesian ability to build houses that were sustainable to earthquakes. And all this is extremely extra important in our age of climate crisis. Sustainability and the knowledge of how to work in our own societies and in our local settings is something which is extremely important, because the industrial heritage which we discuss now is also a carrier of a very big unwanted heritage. So this is still one more point of the importance of making this interconnection be between the small scale industries and the big scales. And in part, they also tell the same stories, but from very different angles.
Yeah, I was struck by Kai's description of the diesel ship engine, which is used from Switzerland, then converted to become an engine in the jute mill in Nepal, which would make things to be sent to India, and the profits of which would be used to get new fashions from Europe. And I think this little story that you captured was very vivid in making this very interconnected landscape, which is really the part of the study of industrial heritage. It's transboundary, and it cannot be studied in a static way. And I think this group today, we are over 40 people from several countries, is really showing that this is probably the way forward. And when we were inviting the two speakers, our question was really, can we do things differently in the study of Asian industrial heritage? How do we do things differently? There must be new methods to studying this new aspect of heritage. And possibly there's an answer there about interconnections and working together. Thank you once again. And I'd like to invite my colleague Bikramji Chakrabarti to say a few words on behalf of NSC Documentation of ICOMOS India.
Yeah. Good evening and thank you, Malashri. I think this is a very interesting session, and initiative was really good to have all of you on board regarding this particular issue. Two specific points I would like to share over here, which came up from the speaker's presentation. The first and foremost thing, which is like what actually this industrial heritage, the meaning of the industrial heritage for us, is it because of a birthplace, or not birthplace, but a place of nurturance of political ideology, which Kai has mentioned, which is very interesting actually, because a lot of layers of phenomena happen through these industries, and which particular narrative we would like to pick up and promote further, propagate further, transfer further is very, very important. And I really think that these are the points which we definitely look at. That other point which I definitely try to talk about, that is which practitioner Hasti has pointed out, there is a balance, because there are lot of series of issues which has came up at an epitome and then fallen, and right now we are trying to protect. Now, which aspect of it we would like to promote and protect? And would you like to only talk about the most positive aspect of it and only celebrate, or we would also like to remember the component which is really, really not very warm at that particular point in time? So these are the questions I think in coming days all of us need to look at, and this is a good point to trigger the thoughts in this forum. So yes, it's a wonderful evening today to have different experiences, and thank you to Malashri especially and Kamal Banerjee, who is co-coordinator, and Malashri as a coordinator, to initiate this and engage other NSC to be part of this particular initiative. I would definitely like to thank everybody, but before that, I request all of you, if you just keep on your video so that you can have a group photograph. May I request Lipika, if she is here, if just take a snap for our overall, memories.
Sure, sir.
Yeah.
I request everyone to turn on their cameras, please.
Thank you.
Just take one more minute. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, of course, this particular initiative, is possible because of ICOMOS India's overall, goal to promote new thoughts in the discipline. And as Malashri has said, she has taken over this particular NSC, and it's a very new NSC. Also, we're all together working. So I must be very, very thankful, and my gratitude to our ex-com and president, vice president, who was there at the beginning of the session. Nonetheless, this whole event is coordinated though by NSC Industrial Heritage, but supported by NSC Documentation, myself as a coordinator, conservation architect, and associate professor. And 20th Century Heritage is also part of this. And this whole initiative is not possible because without the help of EPWG group, and it is really, really great to have them always on board every time. Whenever I think Priyanka is there, Priyanka has taken the initial part, and this is the sort of situation which we need to now take over in coming future. As a part of NSC documentation, we are constantly looking at the inventorization process. But yes, as I must say that when we do the inventorization, we mostly record the textual information, but also the spatial informations and how to document it is a real challenge. And the advanced technique of documentations and how efficiently we can use such techniques to document without any destructive, kind of a non-destructive technique. If we can use it, then it would be probably a much better situation in terms of a spatiality which we documented, along with the sociality, along with the culture, along with that. Okay, by saying that, I must be very thankful to all the participants, audience, and varied from, it's a global representation here today evening in Indian time. I'm really, really thankful to all senior colleagues. Jan is, shared his experience and questions, and Nita, who has shared her experience in Nainital. It's really interesting. There were senior professors like Professor Changamuttabas, who was there at the, quite a few long time. I think he's not here. A lot of students, my previous students who have joined, my colleagues. I think it's a new beginning, and we will definitely continue with this initiative further. We will look for a concrete document from this interaction. Thank you all to come here and be here with us. Over to
Thank you, Bikramjit. Next week, on the 6th of November is our next talk, and we will continue this conversation about Asian industrial heritage with Professor Shin Muramatsu, a former professor at the University of Tokyo, and Zeynep Kuban, who's a professor in Istanbul. And we will continue this conversation about the difficulty of formulating what is modern industrial heritage. And I hope that you all can join us again on the 6th November. Thank you, and bye-bye. Have a nice day.